This week on the Walk On podcast.
I have found that we're taught, many of us, that vulnerability is a weakness. And I grew up as a kid who was very afraid to fail. And it kept me from enjoying all sorts of experiences as a kid and limited me as an adult. I even picked working for 20 years in a law firm environment where failure is, quite frankly, not rewarded at all and perfectionism is the standard, because somehow that felt safe.
Thinking about exactly what to do to you.
Welcome back to the Walk On podcast. This is your host, Michael Mills. For those of you that are new, or maybe you're dipping in and out, this podcast really is about a pursuit of finding one's passion. How do you find and live a life that is of value and where you feel valuable? And I started this journey a couple of years ago as I kind of hit a rut professionally. And so I started reading all kinds of books on finding your passion, finding your purpose, and it led me to this podcast. The last thing I'll say before welcoming our guest is Walk On comes from the song Walk On. You might, if you're a football fan, know Liverpool, and they use it a lot. But the whole point of the song is no matter in your darkest days, continue on, continue with progress, keep your head up. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And that's what this is about. So we're going to continue our journey today with Whitney Marshall, founder of Whitney Marshall Coaching. She's a certified professional coach, and she cultivates and nurtures more genuine and generous leaders. She is a proud North Carolinian. She's called Atlanta home for more than 20 years. She's a dedicated mom to a young son. And we've known each other for quite some time, actually going back to Atlanta's corporate philanthropy community, which I know Whitney will talk about in a minute. She was a leader at a national law firm driving community relations and corporate citizenship until a very recent transition, which we're excited to talk about. I think most importantly for me, Whitney's just an authentic community person who shows up. And one of the ways we really got to know each other, I was helping to drive a community program together that was shining spotlights on local nonprofits and trying to energize some support for them. It was kind of Shark Tank style with some dinner and some networking. And Whitney was a regular guest. So she shows up for her friends, and she showed up today. So Whitney, welcome.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Michael. It's great to be with you.
Well, awesome. Well, that was a very brief intro, and it surely does not do your interesting career justice. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So you mentioned I'm originally from North Carolina, moved to Atlanta after graduating from UNC Chapel Hill in 1999, which feels like a gazillion years ago, and spent the first 20 years of my career actually at a large international law firm. And never, ever intended to spend 20 years in a large international law firm. And we'll get into this perhaps in a little while in terms of how in the world I ended up where I did. My father was convinced, he is a lawyer, he was convinced I was going to go on to law school. But the joke became like, oh, absolutely not, after working there. But I had the good fortune to discover I'm more entrepreneurial than I ever realized, and got to build from scratch employee volunteer program, which then turned into, by the end of my tenure at the firm, I was a director of corporate citizenship. And it then encompassed so many more things than the employee volunteer program. But I never set out to do any of that. And now I'm a leadership coach and have set out on creating something new again that I, quite frankly, never intended to create. And so I think that part is a fun piece of the journey, and one that I'm learning more about myself as I go. But I think it's
the joys of entrepreneurship.
Oh my goodness, yes. And I think it's much more for me about I was talking to a friend and a fellow coach the other day, and we were talking about this idea of falling upward into your career as opposed to necessarily climbing this ladder with this intention of getting somewhere. I've never necessarily had the final destination in mind. But I've always tried to pay attention to who I am, what I care about, and what I'm good at, and let those things help be a driver, which is a little
walking
different.
On every day.
There you go. Walking on every day.
Well, tell us a little bit. Thanks for that background. Tell us a little bit, Whitney, about how you landed in this journey of coaching. And as you and I have shared, I'm on that journey as well. And I've shared drips and drabs of this with our seasons of podcasts. But I'm going through that right now. I'm doing an ICF certified program at Brown University on my way to being a leadership and performance coach. So how did you get there? I loved your metaphor of going up. How did you get there?
Yeah. So It's an interesting one, and I'll do the short version. But if you were to ask my third grade self what she wanted to be when she grew up, she would have told you teacher or child psychologist. And I never officially became either one of those things. And yet now I'm in a career where I have an opportunity to lead workshops. I have an opportunity to share knowledge with clients. And as a coach, in many ways, I'm trying to always listen for the deeper why and be willing to uncover and excavate what's going on and maybe what might be contributing to where someone is today or where they want to go. And so I find that I am now perhaps more wholly honoring little Whitney than I ever have in my career prior to this point, which is super, super fun. But I graduated from college really unsure of exactly what I wanted to do. I thought I was going to go and get certified to become a teacher and didn't end up getting into the School of Education at UNC Chapel Hill, which was devastating to me because I had it all mapped out. And then I didn't know what to do. And unfortunately, the college and career advising at that time was not very robust. And so I also was then fortunate enough to graduate in an economy that was good. And the recommendation was literally go and get a job and figure it out. You'll be fine. Well, for someone who thought that they had a plan, it got derailed. I literally just needed a job. And then I needed to pay my bills and wanted to, try my hand at this adulting thing. And my parents have been very crystal clear that it was a 4-year journey in college for me. And then I had 3 months to figure it out. And that was it. And so the pressure was on. So I got a job as an HR assistant at a law firm, simply to get a job. And a number of people had said, Whitney, you're great with other people. HR will be a wonderful job for you. You can talk to anybody. But I was miserable. I didn't feel like it was the best use of my skills. But I went to college for this. Fast forward several years later, the managing partner of the firm at the time had a vision of trying to separate the firm from a business standpoint from other large law firms through its culture. And he decided to hire the firm's first pro bono partner, which for the time was a very big, bold move. And we hired the firm, the Southeast's first pro bono partner to coordinate all of the pro bono work. Problem was I wasn't a lawyer and I couldn't do any of the things that she was organizing that I loved. We became good friends. And in complete naivete, I ultimately crafted a business plan to present to the managing partner to create the firm's first employee volunteer program. Quite frankly, because I was so frustrated that for those of us who weren't lawyers or paralegals, that we didn't have access through our employer to do formal service. And at that time, as you know,
locked out of those opportunities.
We were completely locked out. And I had a deep sense of injustice about that. It felt really uninclusive. It felt really misaligned. And as you know, which is how we first met, we were involved with an organization called the Corporate Volunteer Council. And through that group, I learned, how to create an employee volunteer program, pitched it to the leadership, fast forward, and spent the next 15 years trying to build this broader commitment to corporate citizenship, which actually became the firm's identity. It was a piece of what drew people to the firm, what helped retain them at the firm. And I had so much satisfaction from being able to be a piece of contributing to the identity. But my work was really rooted in trying to connect people with projects that they cared about and trying to get them engaged, helping match attorneys with nonprofit boards that they could serve on. And what it led to was a daily, unexpected conversations with people at all levels throughout the firm about who they were, what they cared about, what was bothering them, what mattered to them, what were they seeing in their communities they wanted to get involved with, and then trying to help them figure out a way to connect that to something that wasn't about the billable hour. And
I'm sensing the roots of coaching right within that work, right?
Here we go, right?
Yeah.
And so that was quite frankly a lot of what I did. And in many ways, I became somebody, along with a pro bono partner, who had all sorts of conversations that were like not necessarily a part of the job, but they were a piece of the fabric of what helped build a culture of caring and service and that sort of thing. So then fast forward in 2019, I went in for what I thought was going to be my 20th performance review. And instead they told me that my job was going to be eliminated that that was my last day at the firm, and I had to pack my office. And it
Mm,
was devastating.
I can
And
imagine.
it was incredibly hard. I didn't get to say goodbye. I had
Mhm.
built quite a program, had built so many
Yeah.
friendships, had very, very deep relationships. And I left on some level feeling very blindsided, feeling betrayed on some level, and felt shame, which was really hard to name at first and very hard after feeling like I had contributed so positively. I had just a 1.25-year-old son. I had elderly in-laws living with me who unexpectedly had come to visit the baby when he was little, 8 weeks old, and then lived with us for a year and a half. My
Just
father-in-law ended
stayed.
up in the
Yeah.
hospital, and then we were all home, and I had to figure
Yeah.
out what I wanted to do. And I tried to interview for other CSR jobs and really wasn't showing up as my best self. And what I realized
Yeah.
in time with therapy, a lot, all sorts of conversation and wine, that I really wasn't trusting of another corporate role because of what had
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
And I,
If I can just dig in there for a second, if that's
please,
okay with you, you know, I don't know if you haven't been let go before, there are many different terms for that now. I've been in that position as well. It is deeply personal, and shame is a powerful word, but that's true, right? It is this sense of what did I do wrong and why me and how could you? And you go through the stages of grief, right? And it really is it's hard to see what's next when you're in that sort of pit of despair and sadness and anger and loneliness. But I know you dug out and you turned. And
mhm,
so, but I just wanted to stop for a second and particularly for folks who are listening to acknowledge them if they've been in that position before, because you're not alone. Really
yes.
talented people this happens to all the time.
Yes, thank you for echoing that because I
Yeah.
think that it's something that we don't talk enough about, quite frankly. And what I really wanted to do, and quite frankly, what I did for months was hide. I just needed to
Yep.
cocoon. And my job for 20 years had been being out in the community. There was this
Mhm.
blurred line between my identity and then the firm, my role at the firm. And in any sort of community relations role, as you know, because you've done it your whole career too, your identity sometimes starts to bleed in and people see
Sure
you
does.
and kind of think, oh, there's such and such company. And so I really needed to hide to heal. And I realized that I wasn't able to show up if I didn't take the
Yeah.
pause. And it wasn't initially intentional. It was just what felt right.
Cope
A
and
way to
recover.
cope.
Yeah.
Yeah, a way to cope. All my emotions were right here. And I knew if I
Mhm.
saw, like, which for people who are not able to see me,
Yeah.
right at the surface is
Thank
really what
you.
I should be saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Um, and and that was hard. And, also
Yeah.
recognition that, like, I needed to deal with my own stuff. That wasn't anybody else's
Yeah.
responsibility. But I also realized I had been on for a very, very long time
Mhm.
and had not been still enough to consider what I needed for a very, very long time. And so when you've been operating at that place of burnout for many,
Mhm.
many years, more than, 10, if I was being honest about 60
Sure.
to 80-hour work weeks for more than a decade, it'll catch up to you. Pausing was a really great gift, but it felt very scary at the time
Mhm.
to accept it. And I very much felt I had failed.
Mhm.
And it was very, very hard to sort of figure out what was next.
Yeah.
Um,
So what is that connection, Whitney? Where does little Whitney, you have this light bulb go off or you have this moment, talk to our listeners a little bit about what that was like and, how you got to this new you.
yeah. So there's two things that happened for me that were really, really important. I was a program co-chair for a leadership program here in Atlanta and was really great because I had to keep showing up. I had something that forced me to keep coming to a monthly program. And the January 2020 program was on mastering change. How fortuitous.
Ooh,
Um,
fantastic.
and a dear friend who had just made the transition from practicing law to coaching was speaking at that program.
Mm.
And I knew her story. So to be honest with you, I kind of disconnected from what she was saying And I just allowed myself to journal in my journal that I had at the
While you were
time that
there,
I
while you were
kept
in the
notes
room.
while I was in the
Yep.
room. And I wrote for the first time about what it was that I wanted. And something that she said just happened to catch me. And it's something about like, what is it that you're afraid to let go of that's preventing you from doing whatever it is that you want to do? And I wrote, and what I wrote, I'm going to read it because it was important.
Let's do it. Yeah.
I want to coach people to help them get the support they need as they consider what they want to do with their lives, how to live with intention, authenticity, and vulnerability. I want to combine what I've learned in the other leadership programs I've participated in, assessments that I've done, life experience that I've had to help other people. I didn't get the guidance that I needed in college as I was considering my major. I didn't have any coaching as I considered my college options. I didn't have a coach as I evolved through my career. I realize I can help others be successful and change the world in the process. Let's go.
What a powerful recognition in the moment, and how deeply that's resonating with what you're doing now.
Yeah. And I got home and I read it to my husband. And this was the second thing that became really important. And he said, what are you going to regret more, doing this and failing or not doing it at all? By the next week, I had researched coach certification programs, had applied. And by March of 2020, ironically, the weekend the world shut down from COVID, I was sitting in a ballroom, the last one that I went to for a very long time, and started my coach certification. And we were in person. And after that, everything pivoted to online.
Yeah.
So it happened really fast once it happened, but it took some cocooning first.
Yeah. Well, getting that distance from the pain and the sense that, as a coach, the role of powerful questions, and, what a powerful example you had, and then a powerful question from your partner. It is funny how those sort of serendipity things that are meant to be. I mean, I'd sort of been in this, spiral of reading books about purpose and not and trying to reflect. And those are the exercises. Some books are very good, some aren't, some are behind my shoulder. But it was just this random moment where I'm a new city council member, and one of my colleagues at a holiday party, as we're all getting to meet city staffs, starts asking me about grit and my perspective on grit, and whether that's in you or teachable. And I said, why? And this is a person who does a really good job of continuing adult education, law degrees and PhDs. And he was going through a coaching program, and he was like, why aren't you coaching? And I was like, why am I not coaching? And sort of the same moment as you, I was like, wait, I coached a sport. My friends have always come to me for advice. My colleagues have always come to me. That's been my role. And it just sort of clicked. And so those moments of serendipity, I guess you have to be open for them or have space for them, which is what you gave yourself, was space to heal a little bit and then be open to what was going to be coming your way.
Yes, absolutely. And without creating some space, we usually, I did this for a very long time and continue. I'm still a work in progress, so I by no means have it all figured out. But so often we're moving so quickly that we miss so many of those opportunities to pay attention, to hear what either our body is trying to tell us or a thought that might come our way. We don't create a pause to reflect. And for me, it has been in that reflection that all my answers have kind of come, right? Sometimes more slowly than I would have liked. Sometimes it feels like, oh God, and I just have to like hit you over the head, Whitney, But when I don't give myself any space, I find it's a very different day to day for me. Yeah.
And if we're so narrowly focused on an outcome or an answer, I've got to find it. Like as you said that, and this is not where we've outlined the podcast. So I love this. We're going to pivot and keep going. This is great. But, there's a West Wing episode. I don't know if you ever watched the West Wing, but, the president of the United States has to make a very tough decision. And he kind of is mad at the world, and he's very religious, and he's mad at God. And there's a priest sitting there, and he tells this parable of, the man misses all the signs, passes away. And when he's at the pearly gates and he meets Jesus, he says, what are you looking for? I sent you a rowboat, a plane with a ladder, right? All these things are right in front of you, but he was waiting to hear from God, right? And I think we get so focused on, I'm intent on finding an answer. I'm intent on bettering myself. And we lose that perspective and space of listening to ourselves, listening to the world around us. And so I think it's a really powerful message to just, whatever form you want to take, find that space to be quiet for yourself and to truly listen to what's inside.
Yeah. I think the other piece to that, and just simply building on what you said, is not judging what comes up.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
the answer is not what you expect or
Mm-hmm.
is not what other people expect for you or of you.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes if you listen, there is this natural, like, but of course piece to it all. One of the things
Mm-hmm.
that held me back when I finally made this decision to switch into this new coaching career, that same woman who was hiding because she felt
Mm-hmm.
shame and betrayal and anger and all the things, just as you described,
Mm-hmm.
through that guilt kind of processing. Then my hiding became fear of
Mm-hmm.
announcing what was new. And it felt so big to me. I didn't have a
Yeah.
website for the first year I was in business because I was a little bit nervous
Yeah.
about what were people going to say and, all these
Mm-hmm.
things. And yet so convicted because I'd gotten
Yeah.
still and knew it was right. But then I started worrying about what everyone else thought, which is so
What
ridiculous.
the being part of the larger world
Ah,
and instead of your voice. Yeah.
that's right.
That
And that
inner critic, as we
they,
would call it in coaching, right? The inner
that's
critic.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
And they, air quotes,
Yeah.
have such a powerful hold on us. And we most of the time
Yeah.
can't even name who they are. But I think the other piece that was so validating was the second that I let other people know what I was doing and let some of that go and just kind of did the, what have I got to lose piece of this
Yeah.
whole thing to a person, everyone said, oh, yeah, it totally makes sense.
Of course.
You've been doing
Yeah.
that your whole life, Whitney.
That's right. That's right.
And then it was like, what the heck was I so afraid of? Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that was the other piece, was just sort of like making space,
Mm-hmm.
allowing yourself to see what comes, and trusting that, quite frankly, if you are following something that
Yeah.
feels important, that feels a piece of like honoring some aspect of you,
Yeah.
most of the time, other people are going to see, maybe even in time, if not immediately. That makes so much sense. So
And then you start radiating that. And I want to talk about your practice and approach in a second. But one of our previous guests, who I believe Anna Ruth Pfeiffer, said we had a conversation one day, and her business is rocket fuel, and I'm sort of just like grinding every day. And she's like, I love what I'm doing, and I wake up every day and just I can't wait to go do that work. And it sounds like you've found that what you're doing is aligning with your values and purpose. And I want to, you're working with mid-career leaders is sort of a sweet spot. And I want to read for folks that are listening something that you said, because I think it's really powerful. I do not believe you have to choose whether to lead with your head or your heart. And in fact, I believe learning to do both is a superpower. So why is finding and leveraging this skill set so important in today's workplace, particularly with those mid-career leaders you're working with?
yeah. So I have found that we're taught, many of us, that vulnerability is a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up as a kid who was very afraid to fail, was rewarded for things when they went, quote, perfectly, just right.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept me from enjoying all sorts of experiences as a kid and limited me as an adult. I even picked working for 20 years in a law firm environment where failure is, quite frankly, not rewarded at all, and perfectionism is the
Mm-hmm.
standard, because somehow that felt safe to
Yeah,
me.
it was something you
It was
knew.
familiar. I knew how
Yeah.
to succeed, in theory,
Yep.
in that world, and I did for a really long time. But in 2008, I sat on my now therapist couch, who's been my therapist since 2008. The first time I ever went, and the only thing I could get out of my mouth for an hour session, which we now joke about, like, I paid you for just this, Lily, was I just want to be authentic. It's the
Mm-hmm.
only thing I could say. And I had
Mhm.
been holding so much in and so much back for so long that
Yeah.
it all caught up to me. And at that time, I was in the middle of being separated from my first husband. We ultimately got divorced. I was not feeling I was showing up as my best self. I was exhausted because I was working 60 to 80 hours a week. For what?
And
Um,
carrying this all around.
Carrying it all around and didn't feel as though
Yeah.
I could say anything to
Yeah.
anybody
Yeah.
about that. And what I realized is once I finally got to willing to share some of that with other people, I gave them permission to share too. And then they felt
Mhm.
like they could say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I thought you had it all together. And then we
Yeah.
could have these very different conversations
Mm.
about what we were challenged by, how we wanted to solve it. For the first time, I really started to articulate what my values even were. I kind of had
Mhm.
always been a values driven person. I had grown up with
Mhm.
a pretty deep understanding of right and wrong and who I
Sure.
was and what I wanted to do. Always had a heart for service, but I never paused to really think about like, what is it that I truly value? And appreciating that in different seasons of my life, those values might change or at least shift in order. In 2010, when I was single, my value around family was a very different order than it is
Mhm.
now as a mom. And I've gotten remarried and I have a whole new family. And
Yeah.
so now family is like the thing that is the
Mhm.
priority, and everything else is going to orbit around that. So I think for me, the more I can help leaders understand, and I focus in on mid career leaders because I feel like there is enough opportunity to have had some water under your bridge and some life
Mhm.
experience that
Yeah.
you more fully appreciate the value in showing up differently and what that might
Mhm.
mean because you've seen the consequence perhaps of
Mhm.
what it looks like if you don't do that. Or maybe you've just strayed a bit and now you're feeling some dissonance. Or perhaps you're
Mhm.
asking questions around like, what do I want for this rest of the life I've got if I'm lucky enough to
Yeah.
have this big second act, whatever. And so now I'm just deeply committed to trying to be the coach that I wish I had had along the way.
Yeah.
Um,
And what it is interesting. There's a proliferation. I mean, if you just Google, coaches near me, you're going to get hundreds of people. And there's a whole other conversation for another podcast about the rigor of programs that I've gone through and you're going through and being certified. And that's a different conversation. But there is this proliferation because there's this need. I think you have employees are really becoming more aware and more awake to themselves as individuals within the organization. And I think there is massive misalignment between companies certainly espousing any values they have about how they treat their employees and truly how they build, hire, and grow leaders that are focused on the people. you know, your products, your services are of little value if you don't have the team members to deploy them, to build them, et cetera, et cetera. I'm saying all the things but so to me, that's the need. And I think there are people hungry and interested in being more whole in terms of who they are in the workplace and who they are in their personal life because they are so married. We spend so much time. And you talked about how your identity was wrapped up in our community work and being there for people and showing up. And so as you have these conversations and have had them the last couple of years, what are the skills or the things most frequently coming up that your clients, obviously not giving anything away, but that they want to refine or they want to lean into or they want to tap into? What are sort of the trends of things that people are focusing on?
yeah. So I think that COVID really forced everybody to hold up a really important mirror, right?
Yeah.
Companies included, about what really matters, right? And as you think about just general well being, we saw such a spike in people's feeling sense of connectedness at the workplace in like May of 2020. And then now you look at the latest Gallup Employee Engagement Survey and it's tanked again. And for a
Yeah.
while, companies were doing really intentional work to check on the well being of their employees. And they now say that the biggest activity that a manager can do to contribute to a sense of connectedness and well being on their team is to have one meaningful conversation with each team member a week. Just one, and
Hmm.
meaningful, not just, did you get this done? Okay, thanks. Talk to you later. And so what I'm seeing the most frequently for my clients, and as a leadership and transition coach, I kind of have two paths, right? Somebody who's coming
Yep.
because they usually are contemplating a transition of some kind, typically professional, or they simply really want to hone some leadership skills, or there's a big leadership change that's happening, a
Yep.
rift, acquisition, something like that. And they really want to make sure they're showing up as their best selves.
Mm.
So I think there is some version for me. The number one is like, how do you lead with your head and your heart, but not sacrifice yourself in the process? So what does it look like to have boundaries? What does it look like to say no? What does it look like to not lean into those perfectionist tendencies? What does it look like to have time management skills so that you can be very clear about your priority? Navigating intentional or difficult conversation. And what does it look like to lean in instead of avoid is another big one that I see a lot of my clients doing, especially for people who are service-oriented, heart-forward leaders. Having a hard conversation is very difficult because of what they perceive someone will, do in kind, or how that might change their perception of them. Listening to understand, not respond, is another big one. And what is that? What do you do to cultivate trust as a leader? Because you're listening from a different place and trying to build connection instead of just have an answer. And then lastly, which is, I guess, a bit linked to number one, which is really honoring your whole self. What does it look like to be fully authentic in your work and at home? And this idea, I coach a lot of women, but I have many male clients too. So this is not a gender specific answer,
Sure.
right? But really trying to figure out, and I think COVID induced this too, right? Like, I want to be very clear that life outside of work exists and is important to me. And what do you do to try to ensure that you're showing up and doing a really great job leading during the day in your paid job? And then what are you doing to do the exact same thing in the rest of your life? And how can those things help each other as opposed to feeling as though there's these separate buckets somehow? And I think COVID is one of the benefits is that those lines feel less distinct now, and people are much more willing to say, these other parts of me matter too. But getting confident enough to have those conversations and be vulnerable enough to have those conversations can be hard for people. So those are the biggest things that I'm working on. There's a whole host of other very specific skills that people want to develop. But if I kind of sum up the parts, those seem to be the biggest things lately.
And that's great. And there's a through line, and it's really kind of funny. And we're getting near the bottom of the hour for our podcast. I want to be respectful of your time because I'm so appreciative of you being here. But as I went into starting my coaching journey, I remember sort of thinking like, I've done therapy, I've been to seen a therapist, I've done stress, I've seen a stress coach, I've done all these things, I've watched, YouTube clips, and gosh, I don't want to do any kind of coaching where it's this like super like confessional, and I sort of like an hour into the first, in-person class, like we're crying, we're like, deeply sharing with each other. And I think the thread is everything that you just talked about is about the person. It's about the human. Whether you're a leader leading the team, you have to tap into your people, but you have to tap into yourself to do that. And so it is funny. My prescription now, as you know, coaching is not therapy, and there's a clear line for that, but you really do have to meet people where they are and look at who they are as humans. And then how does that show up in the workplace? How does that show up at home? So it is just sort of funny to me that all the things you pointed out that people are working on are human and they are very personal. So it's great.
We are humans first.
We are humans first. There's a bumper sticker somewhere. No. So thank you so much for being on. I sort of want to end here because I have a feeling, and you've shared a bit of this, but is there a piece of advice, someone who's a client that shows up at your door or who, is just really curious, how do they tap into what they're passionate about?
So I talked a bit about this earlier, but don't be afraid to pause and ask what your third grade self really loved. Often we forget. And if you can pay attention to that or get into, maybe they really love to dance, maybe they really love music, and maybe you realize like, oh my gosh, I've gotten so far away from doing anything creative. I'd really like to pursue something that is more creative than what I've been able to do for years, or whatever that might be. That's my first piece of advice. And then there's a great Rumi quote that I love, which is, let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray. And that requires us to slow down and pay attention to what is even pulling it all. We're so busy all the time. And so trying to make space so that you can listen is incredibly, incredibly important. And I realize that's also it's a privilege to be able to have space and make space. And so finding ways to do that, whether that's in the car with the music off and no podcasts, not this one, of course.
Obviously.
Going, if you have time in the car and you're
Yeah.
actually alone, like giving yourself some white space. So often we're putting so many inputs in, but making the time to reflect and see what comes, and being still enough and patient enough is a really big piece to me of what helps you get answers to that question.
Well, I couldn't think of a better place to wrap this conversation. I'm leaving both feeling calmer about my journey, but also super excited because of this conversation with you. So, Whitney, thanks for being on today. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
It was truly a privilege. Yeah, thank you. Well, this is the Walk On podcast, people leading with passion and purpose, providing a roadmap for your personal journey. Hear their stories, find your purpose, walk on. Thanks again, Whitney.
You bet. Thank you.
Next up on the Walk On podcast.
We talk about vicarious trauma, right? That influences compassion fatigue. But there's also this concept that I think doesn't get enough attention, vicarious resilience. This idea that we can learn how to be resilient from others. We can glean some of that resilience from others. And I think that's why it's so important for us to also, in kind of shifting the narrative, to not only speak of suffering, but also tell stories of resilience, of recovery, of the possibilities that everyone deserves.
I can't believe you didn't notice the 1,000 times I walked by. I must have looked like a neon sign saying, look at me, won't you look at